With over 12 years of experience in corporate social media, content creation, and community building across digital channels, and author of the best-selling book, Facebook Marketing, Designing Your Next Marketing Campaign, please welcome Justin Levy, King of Social, Director of Social, and Influencer Marketing at Demandbase, and might I mention, quite the influencer himself to the show. Justin, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
Absolutely, as long as you don't continue to say I'm the king of social media.
We can negotiate that. I see the work you're doing over at Demandbase, and I think it's arguably, you might have to prove me wrong, but it's negotiable. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I know we're going to get radically transparent about all things social and some other interesting topics. But before we move forward, we've had a number of demand-basers, if you will, on the show. And we'd love to learn a little bit specifically for your role and your journey. How did you find yourself among some of the greats at Demandbase?
Yeah, so I started, like you said, my journey about 12 years ago. I was working at one of my first jobs out of college, and this was really at a time when Twitter was coming of age, well, when social was coming of age in of itself. So you had a lot of social networks that were all fighting to become what Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are to us today, right? You know, they were fighting for that day-over-day adoption, that monthly user adoption, and some of those terms that would become frequently understood by us. So this was when, say, for example, you could only reply or DM via text for Twitter because they didn't have a mobile app yet. It was during the days of the failed whale when they didn't have the bandwidth that they needed, or any of those types of things. And a number of other social networks were here and gone within 6 to 12 months. And at that time, so I was at my first job out of college or so, my best friend's restaurant was losing around 30% per month. And so I came in just to help him. I had restaurant experience. And so, you know, I came to help him serve one night here or there, or we were just kind of commiserate after a rough day for him. And I kind of stepped in to experiment with this concept that was becoming to be called social media. And so we did some things that were kind of basic and that should have been done, and that was redesigning the website top to bottom. And that's not really social media per se, but it was to enhance the SEO, because even to this day, you'll see a lot of restaurant menus that are just PDFs. So it's, you know, see our menu, and you click on that, and the menu is the PDF of the menu that's actually in the restaurant. So I wanted that different. I wanted it to be dynamic. I wanted to be something that was friendly to search. So we redesigned that. We set up a third-party blog that its purpose was to be a blog for foodies. So it was all third-party contributors that wrote about their meals and, you know, their recipes and why they enjoyed food. And the reason why we set it up on a third-party domain was because at that time, I didn't think anyone would want to read a blog that was on a website for a restaurant, right? You'd probably just assume, oh, this is what the specials are going to be for the next day, or what have you. So we went through all that, and we started to test social channels. YouTube became probably the biggest hit for us. So we started a weekly show where we described how you could do kind of chef-like things at home. So he unzipped a tomato with a kitchen knife, and he showed you how you can make fire roasted beets and how to trim down sides of beef. And so that started to catch on a bit for us, and we saw sales come back into the black, and then eventually grow 20% per month, month over month for close to 2 years until the restaurant was named best steakhouse in Western Mass. And that was for 5 years in a row. And of course, wasn't solely because of social media. It was because of the food product and everything that went into that. But it did definitively draw butts and seats. And so out of that, as a result of that, it became a case study throughout a lot of the industry. And I was recruited to start an agency with a gentleman named Chris Brogan, who a lot of people in the industry know. He wrote one of the first books in social with a gentleman named Julian Smith, and that was on New York Times, Wall Street Journal, 800 CEO read, bestsellers list, pretty much everywhere. And we started to work with Fortune 500. So the Citrix, PepsiCo's, AMD's, Microsoft's of the world. And the first client was Citrix.
Okay.
And due to our work over time, they told us, came to me one night and said, hey, if you ever want to leave, we'll create a position for you and you can come over. And so at maybe a year and a half in, 2 years in, we had that conversation, and I left and went to a subsidiary of Citrix, which is or was the subsidiary that dealt with GoToMeeting and Go to My PC and Go to Assist and all those go-to products. I was promoted up to director at Citrix, kind of corporate, and kind of took on global social media end to end. And inclusive of that was our blog and all of that. Kind of went through my time there, about 7 years, which in Silicon Valley is retirement age, and then left there and went on. My cat wants to join this interview, and went from there to ServiceNow. Left Citrix just due to restructuring there, and did some consulting. Went to ServiceNow for about 15 months, where I led social marketing under our CMO. And then, thanks to COVID, found myself without a job for about a year, and did consulting work and some contract work during that period of time before finding my way again to Demandbase. And this was the first time that they were deeply investing in social and in influencer. So, and in a content team. So I report to our VP of content, social and influencer marketing. And when we came, because we were hired in the same week, there was only one person responsible for all content creation within the company. And now we have about 13 people on our team in little under 8 months.
That's phenomenal growth. We're going to get into that, I'm sure, later in the episode. And thank you for getting radically transparent and getting real about the journey there. Definitely not an easy one during COVID, but it looks like you found yourself on top there with an all-star team. I have a few questions, especially to somebody who's been in social for so long. What a lot of us in marketing, specifically B2B, know, right, is that social media, it kind of took a while for B2B organizations and leadership to, I don't necessarily want to see the value, because I think leaders understood the value it could bring. But for whatever reason, I think B2B organizations were slower than our B2C counterparts to adapt a social strategy. And I think post-COVID, and you could definitely keep me honest here, we're seeing organizations understanding that social is critical, and it's now leading many of the marketing strategies, where before it was almost a nice to have or get some millennial to go and do it. And now you actually have a well-oiled machine. So we're going to talk about it, but you've raised some interesting points just in your journey alone. But I do want to ask, to kick off the show, over at Demandbase, which is right known for ABM, a great platform, what, in terms of the social realm, is keeping you up at night professionally or in general? But what is keeping you up at night in the day to day right now? Because social is just, it's ever changing and it doesn't stop.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good point. I think one of the things, well, two of the things is, one, how do we consistently continue to grow our community across the core channels that we care about? And so
Interrupt, but what are Demandbase's core channels, would you say?
yeah, so I would say the two that were really honed on are LinkedIn
Okay.
primary, and then Twitter as a kind of farther secondary. And so, how do you continue to grow your community? And sorry, I can see him as he starts to walk
Be
around.
listening in. There's an adorable orange cat just gracing his or her presence. His or her? Him or her?
Him. It's a him, and he likes to start to around this time of day lay on my laptop and walk across my keyboard. But so when you think about growing your reach, one of the things that you have to kind of use an equalizer for is how do you consistently keep up your engagement too, right? And engagement is one of the primary metrics for us. And thankfully, I have an incredible community manager who is 10 times more creative than I am. But, you can come up with really creative content that drives a lot of engagement. But as you continue to grow your community, are you able to keep up that level of engagement paced with your community?
Interesting.
Right. So you might have a core community and they drive a lot of engagement. And if you think about the way that LinkedIn measures engagement, they consider it engagement. Their engagement rate is based on impressions. And there's a variety of ways you can measure engagement rate. But if you're just going off LinkedIn's measurement, it's based on impressions. Well, that's great. You continue to grow your community, that you have to figure out a way to deal with that. So I'd say that that's one of the things. And to your point, there's an ever number of growing platforms out there. Now, of course, you have TikTok being in kind of the end of 2021 and as the biggest new platform that's out there, especially for brands. It's been popular among individuals for a while, especially a younger generation, but now brands are heavily involved in it and beginning to use it instead of presences. But so with that, are you keeping your core platforms? Well, you have to keep your core platforms where you are seeing success. Well, as the leader of the team or a leader in the team, continuing to understand and explore and identify if and when those other platforms are correct for the brand, and does it make sense? And if so, how many resources are you going to commit to it, right? Or what percentage of your resources, and do you have the content to produce for it, and or the methods or tools to produce? And if so, what's your cadence going to be, right? So for example, you might post 4 times a day on LinkedIn, but maybe as you start out TikTok, for example, that might be 1 post every 10 days. But is that enough to do anything on that platform? Or are you going to post just a post? That's not a good strategy. So you have to kind of play this formula in your head. And if you're leading a team, then where are you going to point your resources? Because every team has limited resources. It doesn't matter if you have 1 person, you have 10 people, there's always going to be limited resources. So that's some of the stuff that certainly keeps me up at night. And another thing I would say, and I've always experienced this in all of my jobs throughout my career, is how to deal with all of the requests and prioritize the request across the company, right? Bigger companies, there's a lot more to deal with, and you want to help support everything and everyone because of the understanding of what their requests are, right? You are in social media by far one of the first places that the outside world goes to hear from on a day-to-day basis. Certainly, depending on the size of company, there are, third-party stories and interviews and podcasts and things like that that are always going to be recorded. But if you have something going on with your corporate responsibility team or your product team or, a new cool marketing initiative, social is always going to be a part of that. And a lot of times they're going to be one of the first channels that it comes out through. So to balance everyone's priorities becomes difficult. Well, growing your reach, not driving down your engagement, and and understand what channels that's right for, because everything wants all their stuff across all channels. So, it all dominoes really quickly with each other.
I only laugh because I feel your pain. The struggle is real. And it actually leads me nicely into my next question. So as you're speaking about, how so many teams really do depend on social, and it doesn't really matter, right? You can sit in the marketing team, but every team, whether you're in HR, whether you're in support, customer success, corporate, wherever you sit, you're wanting messages to land on your corporate channels to get that message across to your audience. So what it leads me to want to ask you, especially with all of your years of experience with working with larger organizations, smaller ones, an array of, diverse teams, where should social media marketing actually sit in an organization, right? We know it on the marketing team, but should it be in content? Should it be in PR? Should it be in corporate? And could you give us some insight into how it works at Demand Gen for those of us who are looking to, hire some full-time social media managers or build out that right team? Where do they need to be?
Yeah, so I've worked in different teams all throughout my career, right? When I was at Citrix, I was part of the global communications team, and I was on the leadership team there. When I was at ServiceNow, I was a part of a digital acquisition team on the marketing side. And it's important to note that because at the time that I was there was a chief communications officer and a chief marketing officer. So there's two different kind of areas of the business, each that had their own social functions within them, right? So on the marketing side, I was part of a digital acquisition team. But on the communication side, social sat with communications, right? So pretty similar between the two companies, being Citrix and ServiceNow. It just of the build of the company was just different in how they structured their teams. And then now I sit as part of a content team. All three of which, have rolled up to the CMO, usually within kind of one deviation away, right? So my VP of global comms reported to our CMO. At ServiceNow, I reported to a senior director who reported to a VP to the CMO. So kind of two deviations away. And then now I report to a VP who goes directly to CMO. So I don't think that it should sit directly on a PR team.
And why do you think that?
Because I think then it gets stuck a little bit in PR, right? So I was part of a communications team that reported to the VP of global comms, and of which PR sat there, but that still gave social the latitude to work with other folks around the company that weren't just coming to the team, in this case, the PR team, for help with what they were doing or product launches or what have you. you weren't kind of pocketed there. And your priorities weren't judged solely by what the PR team was doing. And that's no knock on any companies that are organized that way by any stretch, but at least sitting separate, I had the ability to help corporate social responsibility, or work with other teams around the company as needed that fit into the strategy and that my VP obviously agreed with and understood. So I do think that it should sit within marketing, where within there is always going to be based on the structure of the company and how the companies decide to do it. We've decided to build it out at Demandbase within a content team, which for us makes a lot of sense. There weren't content teams at my previous companies. Here, we built a content team, and our team produces all of our podcasts and ebooks and white papers and infographics and blog posts and things of that nature. It makes a lot of sense that social sits there, because we become a quote unquote mouthpiece for all of this content that we're creating on behalf of the company, and we also have, something that we're kind of really popular for out of our team right now is DBTV, which was the, B2B's industry's first streaming network. So a lot of our content comes with some of our new TV episodes, or, and they drive back to, now we have a platform called DB Central that houses all of our content. So it makes a lot of sense there, as opposed to being somewhere else in the company and just trying to help this team. We know on a day-to-day basis exactly what our team is coming out with, so we can plan to support them.
I think that definitely says something. I mean, first thing, right, like you said, for every team, it's going to be different. Essentially, there's no playbook, and it really does depend on your marketing goals and initiatives. And when you tell how it sits in the content team at Demandbase has really put a central focus on this content team. And if you actually think about the evolution of social media, right, people who are on social right now, right, who, whether they're with the brand or they're individual contributors, they're known as content creators, right? So it makes sense that brands, B2B brands, would eventually adopt these, content teams where social would live. Now, content creators, I'm going to shift kind of with this term, are people who go ahead and they post onto social and they're growing their networks. They're becoming influencers, if you will, in the field. And I think that's a term many of us marketers are familiar with. And in your actual job title, right, you have influencer marketing, a part of that. And I want to zoom in on the influencer part, because I think that's a piece of the marketing social conversation that it's important to be had, but often forgotten. And I want to ask two questions. One is, in your opinion, what identifies an influencer in the B2B marketing space? And two, how on earth are you measuring success in an influencer campaign? Those are my two golden questions.
So one, it can't be, when you identify an influencer, it can't be just based on how many followers they have, right? And I think that a lot of people do that. They go out, they look at how many followers you have. Great, you have 500,000 followers. Cool, we're going to reach out to you and try to work with you. Now, what you fail to kind of take into account there, among a couple things, are how many other brands is that influencer working with? Does their content align with your brand? So it can be great, they have 500,000 followers, but if they speak about, if they speak very publicly, for example, about their political views, is that something you really want aligned to your brand? And it doesn't, it's not which side of the aisle, say you come from, but, or care about. It's just, is a conversation around politics something that you want as the tweet after, yours promoting your product or what have you. So you want to look for an influencer that resonates with your brand, that is someone that can help drive engagement around the content that you're going to engage, that you're going to work with them on. And that might be someone that only has 10,000 followers, right? But that can drive more engagement than someone with, again, just to pick on it, 500,000 followers. And the reason is because they might be focused in their area. So you mentioned ABM before. There can be an ABM influencer that has 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 followers, but their focus is ABM. Well, that resonates with Demandbase, right? As opposed to this person that, let's just say, is B2C, and they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers, maybe even millions of followers. Which one are you going to choose for your upcoming campaign? It becomes fairly obvious. They are a micro influencer, but they're a micro influencer in the topic that you really care about, that resonates with your brand, and their audience is going to resonate with your brand. And then when you get into measurement, I think you have to look at certainly reach and engagement. So, your goal is to reach an audience that you're not able to necessarily reach yourself, right? So you have an audience of, say, 20,000 people. That influencer, by working with them, is going to expose you of sorts to their audience to get in. So now you're going to get into the secondary or tertiary audiences that you would have had a problem reaching or more difficulty reaching. And then engagement. So you're going out with some type of release. We did a fairly large influencer campaign around DBTV. So our goal was to drive traffic back to DBTV and to show engagement metrics around that, right? We wanted people to engage with our videos and to come to the site and stay for a minute to see what other content we had. So we looked at, for example, a popular metric is cost per engagement, right? So we know how much we paid that influencer and how much engagement did they get on that content. You could pay, if it's a paid relationship, you could pay a smaller amount and get more engagement for that person that has less followers than the one that has more followers that might charge you more. Your head, you would say more followers, more money equals higher engagement. That might not be the truth.
Yeah.
Or it might be. You have to look at the metrics. And then I think too, an important metric, one that's probably not measured so often, is what your share of voice is within those influencers. So what I mean there is that that these influencers are working with several other brands at times, probably your competitors, not at the same time, but if they're in your space, they probably or will work with your competitors. So within that set, what is your share of voice? Certainly you want your overall share of voice around your campaign launch to dominate your share of voice among your competitor set or your industry set, but also within that influencer set, what is your share of voice with them? But one of the things that I'll note too is it's really, really important that it's not a transactional relationship, that influencer outreach and influencer campaigns aren't just a point in time and just, you know, a one-way ask. You have to build relationships with influencers and thought leaders, because I don't think they should always be called influencers, but it's a two-way street. So you should support their content. You should, you know, do things with them and for them, so that you have a true relationship. It's not strictly asking them for something.
I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because I do think, as many of us think about influencers, you know, it does sometimes feel like it can be a very one-way initiative. And I like how you call that out. I think that's quite radically transparent of you, if you will, to call that out and remind us all that at the end of the day, we're all human. And essentially it comes down to authentic relationships, and authentic relation. It's like, if you look at sales, right? People buy from people they like at the end of the day, right? So it's the same thing, right? People are going to influence for the people they like and to have those relationships. What are some of the ways, and you know, we're nearing towards the end. I have a few more questions, but this one just popped up. What are some of the ways that you authentically build those relationships? I mean, do you send them dinner vouchers? Do you like, how do you get, you know, that relationship kind of in a solid spot?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly one of the easiest is, you know, to share their content, to be engaged with their content. Um, so that takes some time, naturally. I mean, because you have to consume content on a daily basis, and then do you listen, you know, listen across this kind of social sphere to see what, you know, what conversations they're involved in, and weigh in from time to time, not every time, not on a daily basis per se, but weigh in when it's right as a brand or as an individual within that company. So there's importance to doing both. But I think that, you know, when a brand has the capabilities, yeah, certainly doing things like surprising them, surprise and delight campaigns. When you work with them, you know, coming up with ways that you can thank them. And I think that, you know, there are two ways that you can do that. You can always do swag boxes, or you know, send them something. If it's around a campaign, maybe you're able to do something that surrounds the campaign, right? If not, you can send them swag, or give them access, you know, to an online web store where they can spend X amount of money to buy whatever they like. You know, I was talking to someone yesterday, and he said, yeah, you might not like a baseball hat. So if your preset box has a baseball hat, you might have not scored with that influencer to get them to wear your stuff. But so I believe that that's one thing. But then there's the other thing of whether that's an item that they get sent, or it's an experience. You know, now, kind of thanks to COVID, we have, you know, the capability to do these experiential kind of activities through Zoom and things of that nature, whether that's mixology courses or happy hours with a microbrewery, or, you know, all sorts of things of this nature. But again, this other category is doing something that's non-brand focused. It's just supported by the brand. So a swag box is pure, like, here's our logo, here's our stuff, here's our message. Thank you, but we also wouldn't mind if you wore it. Maybe not so many terms, but other option, that second option is thank you, you know, and here's something. Whether that's cookies, or that's, hey, come join us for a happy hour. It has zero involvement. It's just paid for by the brand.
I love it. So So basically what you're making me think about is that I should be expecting a brand box from Demandbase, and I'll go ahead and send you one from Oktopost. And then all of our fans can keep an eye on our social channels for when we are indeed wearing and showing off each other's swag. I really like that idea. I have one more question for you, and this one is more of a fun one. I was doing a ton of research, truth be told, when I was looking into your background and who you are and your, work professional journey and experience. A lot of really great stuff. So for anyone who's not following Justin Levy, I definitely recommend you go do that and follow him on LinkedIn. But I was hoping you might be able to tell us something about yourself that's actually not on your LinkedIn profile, that we can only learn if you tune into this podcast.
Sure.
And we
So
know you have a cat, so you cannot tell us you have a cat.
two, just one doesn't jump up on my desk. That one does all day long. So you can kind of sniff out a piece of this on LinkedIn. But prior to my career in social media, I was one of the first 25 people in the country to be allowed to earn a master's degree in Homeland Security. And then shortly thereafter, I was recruited by the CIA to join them.
What? That is amazing.
You said one thing that no one would know. So
are you even allowed to tell us that?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got the security clearance. It's funny because before I was in social as well, I wasn't one of the first 25, but I also hold a degree in counterterrorism. So maybe there is some part of our brains, when it comes to national security, that's just a natural fit for being social media directors and marketers. Who knows? But what a fact. Wow.
Yeah, we were the first. My university was the first university in partnership with Department of Homeland Security and NPS, so the Naval Postgraduate School, that put together a program and was allowed to take on the first class of folks that were allowed to have a master's degree in Homeland Security.
Wow. So is there anything, so now I'm stretching the rule, I'm asking you one more question because your fun fact is just mind-blowing. But what would you say is one of the lessons you've learned in that field that you've carried with you into social, which is quite open and a little less secure, if you will?
You didn't put this in the questions you sent me. So, I think that one of the things that I've always deeply kind of protected and always kept at the front of my mind is a relationship building with both our general counsel and our security operations. So big companies have very large security organizations. They typically have a CISO, things of that nature. Smaller ones, maybe not so much. But and I say that because you always have to be a steward of the brand from a social perspective. And as the social media leader, you want to ensure that you have the right social policies in place as for the employees of that company, so they have guidance, but also to ensure that you are the kind of mouthpiece for legal in social media policy. So at one of my previous companies, I had an excellent relationship with our general counsel. I actually knew him as he progressed in his career to becoming our general counsel, but we had a very kind of fun conversation one day. And he said, I'll learn you kind of on law and you learn me on social. And yes, that's not proper grammar, but that's actually how the conversation went. And kind of our point was that I knew and was on top of everything that was going on in social, including rulings that were being made by the powers that be, like the FTC
Mm.
and organizations like that go out and slap brands' hands for not disclaiming things or for illegal practices or things of that nature, that frankly a general counsel of a publicly traded company does not even have time to look at, consider, address. So if you don't have that person that is deeply involved with that, they wouldn't know. Likewise, if there's something happening on the legal side of the business that social doesn't know, we could step outside of our boundaries without even knowing it and put the company at risk. So, and the same thing with on the security side. I've been at companies that have told me that certain topics, when they went out through certain social channels, drove the most number of attacks on our network.
Wow. Okay.
So, we ensured that we were more aligned and more careful in how we worded pieces of content when that happened. Thankfully, we had a very, complicated and network for them, and walls set up. But it was very interesting for me to know that, to help our team and help the company. Thankfully, there was never a breach because of something that I did or we did, but it was helpful to know.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Well, Demandbase certainly has a catch sitting over there in their content team. So Justin, thank you so much for getting radically transparent with me today. I'm taking in all the information you shared, and it's just, you are definitely an influencer in the space. So thank you so much.
thank you.
Wishing you much success in Q4 and beyond. Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you loved today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.